Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Thank you, everyone, joining us live and writing in the chat where you are joining us from. Please do continue to do that. It's lovely to know who is with us live. And hello, if you are watching this after on recording. This is the Commonwealth Day 2025. Together we thrive. Culture and creativity and advocacy across the Commonwealth. My name is Dean Atta. I am a poet and author of Greek Cypriot and Jamaican heritage. I'm joining from London, and I'm going to be hosting today, introducing our wonderful panel shortly. But I should set the context for this wonderful session. So, the Commonwealth has long served for advocacy, driving change in areas such as climate justice, health justice, and freedom of expression. Artistic and cultural interventions have been instrumental in amplifying the voices of the least heard, challenging injustices by presenting alternative narratives and fostering solidarity, building on the successful fusion of creativity and advocacy at the Commonwealth People's Forum. This event seeks to explore how culture and creativity continues to shape movements for justice across the Commonwealth's 5 regions: Africa, Asia and Indian Ocean, Caribbean and the Americas, Europe and the Pacific. This session will present artistic approaches to activism and show how creativity can create social and political change. The Commonwealth Foundation's cultural work is founded on the belief that art and creativity can catalyze social change. From the annual Commonwealth Short Story Prize, the most accessible and international of all writing competitions, to the Creative Grants Projects and the online literary magazine Atta, the Commonwealth Foundation aims to build a community of cultural change makers or artivists who work together for justice in the Commonwealth and beyond. So I am now delighted to introduce the Foundation's Commonwealth Day video, a powerful example of creative advocacy, which employs our panelist Selina's incredible poetry about issues such as climate change, free expression, and human rights, and is blended with striking footage depicting visual metaphors across the Commonwealth. I hope you enjoy it. Let's watch the video.
We are the stand with pride. Turn the tide. Walk beside people. We are fierce love and flow seed, root, grow a forest of knowing people. We are a fight for our lives, people. The coral dying people. I speak truth to powers, people. We are the equality and equity. Empowerment, not charity. We are the people. People.
Wow. Thank you so much, Selina. I'm so impressed with that poem and the visuals that have been added to it. As someone who's had visuals added to my poetry before, it's I think you must be really pleased to see how your words have been illustrated visually as well. And they're so powerful in and of themselves. So I'm really delighted that I'm going to introduce this panel, starting with Dr. Selina. Hello, Selina. Dr. Selina Tusitala Marsh, former New Zealand Poet Laureate and acclaimed author. is a poet, academic, and advocate for the transformative power of the arts, with a heritage spanning Samoa, Tuvalu, England, Scotland, and France. She brings a rich cultural perspective to her work, including her award-winning Mophead graphic memoir series and 3 poetry collections. Recently awarded the Catherine Mansfield Menton Fellowship, Selina will spend 6 months writing in the French Riviera in 2025, further shaping Pacific literature and cultural studies. Hello, Selina, how are you today?
Talofa lava, Dean. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for everyone for being able to organize and host this morning. I bring you warm Pacific greetings from the peoples of Moana Nui Akiwa.
Thank you so much. Next, for the Africa region, we have Kumi Naidoo. Kumi Naidoo is a South African human rights and environmental justice activist, currently president of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and a Payne Distinguished Lecturer at Stanford University. A former leader of Amnesty International and Greenpeace International, he is also a passionate advocate for creative artivism, using music, storytelling, and the arts to drive social change. Co-founder of the Ricky Rick Foundation for the Promotion of Artivism, he explores activism through creativity in his award-winning books Letter to My Mother, The Makings of a Troublemaker, and his podcast Power, People, and Planet. Hello and welcome, Kumi. How are you today?
Hi, greetings to everybody, and so happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and our next panelist. Gosh, this is such a great group of people. I'm so honored to be amongst you all. For the Caribbean region, we have Michael Lees. Michael Lees is a filmmaker and photographer from Dominica, whose work explores themes of climate, circularity, and challenging traditional narratives. There's some alliteration in that bio. And with his award-winning debut documentary, Uncivilized 2020, capturing his survival of a Category 5 hurricane. A graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, his photography has been exhibited regionally, and he has worked with clients like National Geographic and UNICEF while serving as president of Dominica's Artists Association. And I'm really glad to have you here. Hello, welcome. How are you, Michael?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I know it's a tricky word. That's Waitukubuli. So Waitukubuli Artists Association. That's Dominica's indigenous name, which means tall is her body.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate that. And our final panelist for Asia and Indian Ocean region is Riddhi Dastidar. Hello, Riddhi. Riddhi is a Delhi-based writer of Bengali origin whose work spans gender, disability rights, climate, and culture. A UNFPA Lardli Award and Scarf Award winner for their reporting on psychosocial disabilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Riddhi's fiction and poetry have been recognized by the Commonwealth Short Story Prize and TFA Award, with work featuring in Foreign Policy, The Baffler, Vogue, and Atta. They were a 2022 South Asia Speakers Fellow, completing their debut novel under the mentorship of Deepa Anaparara. Thank you for being with us, Riddhi. Hello, and how are you?
Hi, Dean. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be on this panel. Hi, everyone.
Brilliant. And yeah, I'm going to get into our first question because we have so much to talk about. And I'm so glad everyone's seen you and heard you. And we're really looking forward to hearing what you are all up to. Those bios are incredible. And I know your answers are going to be really enlightening, coming from your various backgrounds. So the first question I want to ask you, and we're going to start with Selina, then go to Kumi, Michael, then Riddhi. It is, what does the term creative advocacy mean to you? And with that, I'll ask, what is your experience of creative advocacy, like helping to build partnerships, the shift in attitudes and practices around one of the issues of our focus here? So that's climate justice, health justice, and freedom of expression. Selina, I'll go to you first. And if you want to share anything about your video as well, feel free to share. About 3 minutes each, everyone, for these answers.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to talk really fast. No, I totally got what you mean. It's remarkable to see words pulled out of a poem and put to those powerful representative images. The music, like it actually makes one of the points that I've come to realize over the years is that in order to move minds, we have to move hearts, right? We have to feel the beating of that heart. It's like that classic iambic pentameter metric for the poet, right? It's the beating heart, it's the walking body. Move your body to move your mind, move your heart to change minds. I think that's the beauty of poetry. And when I was thinking about the definition of advocacy, right, about amplifying and empowering and enriching others' voices, it all starts with me, because I can't give what I don't got, what I don't get, right? So in terms of focusing on freedom of expression, for me, it started in 1996 when I was in a high stress situation and I called out to my ancestors, and my grandfather popped into my heart and mind, because I was like in a situation going, who am I to represent the Pacific region at this forum? Who am I? I'm just a Samoan Tuvaluan girl born in the diaspora in Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And grandfather said to me, it's not who you are, it's whose you are. And you are Tusitala. You are what, is translated in English as the teller of tales. And so in 1996, this poem came out fully formed. And Dean, that doesn't happen very often. We work hard for our poems, right? So it's like the first lines of that poem is Tusitala, teller of tales that I never heard till yesterday, born away for another life. Today, the tale I tell is theirs and yours, a way of seeking some more of Samoa, of my sacred center. So advocacy around the world starts there. And these areas of health justice, climate justice, and freedom of expression, as we all know, are interlinked. It's one holistic thing. One feeds the other. And so I guess the point I'd like to leave with our listeners and our viewers is that we can't have a we until we have a me. And the moment that we create art is the most empowering moment we can offer the world. It all begins there. Thanks, Dean.
Thank you, Selina. And I'm glad that you didn't speak fast. You actually took your time with that, because I wanted to savor every word you were saying there. And that was exactly 3 minutes. So you're a pro.
Thank you. I pride myself on time.
So Kumi, the same question to you. And yeah, I want to reflect as well on what Selina said in terms of feeling like you want to represent, I've got mixed heritage, Jamaica and Cyprus, and I can never represent for 2 islands and Britain at the same time. It's a bit much. But Kumi, how do you feel with advocacy, creative advocacy, and the work you're doing? What does it mean?
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. Let me start by saying that I'm very nervous, because recently I was speaking to a group of people, and at the end of my speech, somebody put up their hand and said, have you heard of Martin Luther King? And I said, yes, he inspired the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And then I was asked, do you know what his most famous speech was called? And I said, I have a dream. And she shouted back at me and said, yes, it was I have a dream. But when you speak, it sounds like you have a bloody nightmare, because the oceans are rising, the the forests are disappearing. Fascism is a rise from the United States to Europe. There's eco-anxiety and climate anxiety and so on. So one of the challenges of the moment of history that we find ourselves in and how we situate the power of arts and culture is to recognize that we have to find the right balance between speaking truth to power on the one hand, but also doing it in a way that motivates, inspires, and encourages people to actually get involved. So I want to therefore say that the moment of history that we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford. And the pessimism that justifiably emerges from our analysis, our observations, and our experiences must, can, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our actions, our courage, and our sense of creativity. In that context, I want to say that in February 2022, our son, Ricky Rick, who was a famous and popular rapper and hip-hop artist in South Africa, sat his mom and I down and said to us, guys, I need to tell you all something. You're really bad at what you'll do. You'll have been activists since the age of 15 on human rights, justice of different sorts. And when I look at the world, everything is moving in the wrong direction. And I asked, so why do you think we are failing? And he said, because you all think you'll aim all your messages at the brain and you'll ignore the heart, the body, and the soul. And you cannot move people on the scale that you'll need to unless you'll embrace the full power of arts and culture. So, true, harnessing the power of arts and culture on its own will not deliver us salvation from the climate crisis and the intersecting crisis. However, failing to harness the power of arts and culture almost guarantees that we are going to fail, because the biggest challenge we face right now is that we have a communications deficit. We are not reaching the people that we need to on the scale that we need to, and where most people are spectators in a struggle that they should be centrally involved. The reality is that we need arts and culture today and creative advocacy to do many things, to reach people, to put pressure on government. But most importantly, we need to recognize that what is missing desperately in the world today is actually an imagination and a sense of imagination of what kind of future we can build. And so one of the things that artists bring to the world, and by the way, I'm not an artist, I'm a boring activist, right? So one of the things that artists bring to the world is in fact the capability to help us imagine societies that are yet to be born. And in this moment, when we are running out of time on the climate crisis, as I'm running out of time for my comments here as well, we have to ask ourselves some tough questions about how do we mobilize people on a scale that we've never seen before, because unless we are able to do that, we're going to lose on climate, we're going to lose on gender, we're going to lose on democracy and much more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kumi. Let's bring in Michael now. So we've heard about starting from the self, speaking to people's hearts, not just their minds. Michael, what would you like to say on this question of creative advocacy?
So I think already some great things have been said. I really already had in mind that idea of needing to engage with people's imaginations and both the artists and the public in this sort of co-creation and thinking of imagining a better world. I think that's key. Personally, I have most of my experience is in documentary and around, especially particularly with climate change. I think a lot of times when people think documentary, they maybe think sort of like very journalistic or facts driven, but documentary, just like other forms of film, can be creative. And I think one of the ideas that I love is using whatever art form you have as a sort of Trojan horse to introduce the ideas that you are important to you to a mass of people. Oftentimes people, they don't want an essay, they don't want a lecture, they want entertainment. But if you put your whatever your agenda is into what you're doing, I think that's a really powerful way. So even, for instance, my documentary Uncivilized, on its surface, is like a survival story of going into the forest and then surviving Hurricane Maria and then documenting the aftermath. But really the issues that I'm thinking about are climate change, capitalism, colonial ideas around civilization, and really wanting to plant the idea that what we have in our island, which is a developing country, a lot of the things we have, like clean water and natural resources and community, the things that we were able to survive well on after Hurricane Maria, are extremely valuable, and they're things that often get thrown away as we develop and head towards progress. But I think that being able to help people wake up to that fact is, for me, I think something really important, and important for a lot of the few developing countries that still have a bit of their world intact. Outside of documentary, I'm also part of an art collective called the White Kubuli Artists Association. And so through that work, for instance, last year, we had a group exhibition called Echoes of Resilience, where artists were able to make work about cultural loss, environmental issues at home, all the way to the genocide in Gaza. And then we also had panel discussions kind of like this around. And one of the things that the public really were saying was this is one of the few spaces they had where they were able to engage in these sorts of ideas, have these sorts of conversations, and especially with the art rather than the panels. It's a to some degree, sometimes it's a less threatening, more accessible way to step into this space and start thinking about these things. And then lastly, we also have done a number of murals. And so I would say there's kind of like a resurgence of public art going on. So one of the ones we recently did is for Project SETI, which they're trying to decode sperm whale language using AI. And so it's a whale conservation mural on the bayfront. Another one supporting women in agriculture. And we did a series for Climate Resilience Agency. So just some of the different ways we've been interacting in this space.
That's excellent, Michael. And we're going to be seeing a clip of your film shortly. But first, Riddhi, let's hear more from you about this question of creative advocacy.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of pick up on something Kumi said, which is about kind of, the nightmare moment that we're living in, and the way that this is often communicated in news. It's very, very easy to fall into despair. Like, the headlines are full of doom and gloom. Crops are failing. The monsoons are not coming. There's a genocide in Gaza, as Michael said, So I think as a journalist and as a writer, like those are the two main things I do, and I organize sometimes. I think something we need to think about is what can the arts do to make these issues interesting, to make them fascinating, And in writing, in the arts, the strength that we have is that we can defamiliarize the ordinary. We can make the everyday, the strange, the things that we've gotten so used to, we can make it peculiar again. We can kind of destabilize that. So I think that ability to reach the emotional truth, whether it's through writing or documentary or, whatever, creative forms of activism. Like, I think that's really something that creative advocacy means to me. So in my own work, I'm a writer primarily, but I also have a lot of artist and illustrator friends. I'm queer and I work on disability, and I'm disabled as well, and so are a lot of my friends. So during the COVID-19 crisis in India, there was a moment where there was a complete collapse of infrastructure in Delhi, which is the capital. So there was no oxygen in hospitals. There were like mass cremations and things like that. And as a result of the lockdown that went into place, something that happened is that already the most marginalized communities, like trans people, Dalit people, daily wage workers, for instance, were even harder hit. They did not have food, they didn't have access to healthcare. So essentially, at that time, I kind of went on Instagram and I asked, because I could see that a lot of people were really upset. Everyone was trying to volunteer and help, and it was just chaos. So I said, if I kind of create a document to kind of bring all of these different kind of campaigns that are coming up all over the place together, will that be helpful? And people were like, yes. And then I said that, okay, if I do this, will you help me? And then people started signing up. So we essentially put together a team, and that's how we came up with Mutual Aid India. And so what happened is, it was this collective of artists that became kind of almost like a pro bono, like PR agency for community grassroots leaders, and the work and the relief work that they were doing that was kind of, overshadowed otherwise by bigger like organizations. And so we just managed to raise a lot of money and got a lot of relief supplies and food and health supplies and lots of things across the country. And like years after that, as a journalist, when I go across the country, like I meet people still who are like, oh, like you were with Mutual Aid India, but that's how we managed to get through this. So I think it's really about using the talents that we have and our networks and just kind of thinking creatively. We had a lot of like guerrilla tactics to kind of capture the attention of people who were like big public figures and use that platform to kind of draw attention to people who are overshadowed. Very quickly, another example I would like to give is through zines, through partnerships with other artists, and through teaching writing workshops. Like I have been fundraising. I fundraised for Gaza for food, and also for Mazdoor Kitchen, which is a community kitchen in Delhi, which feeds daily wage workers, homeless people, essentially. So these are also two things that I would encourage people to look up. Gaza Champions, for instance, is a mutual aid organization that another writer I know runs. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Riddhi. I just want to reflect on a couple of things you said that really struck me about making the everyday strange to reach the emotional truth. I thought that was really powerful. And the simple question that you put there, if I do this, will you help me? So like reaching out to your community, your wider networks, but saying, I'm going to instigate it. I just need your support and help. And I think that is a great form of leadership, but also community building at the same time. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's so practical, and people can think about how they can apply it to their settings. Michael, we're going to see your film now. I think we've given it quite a bit of introduction, so let's go straight to it, if that's okay with you. Great, let's see a clip from Michael's film, Uncivilized.
Seems things are going to be this way for a while, but despite some initial ups and downs, we're settling into our leaky roof, no electricity, no internet life. It might sound strange, but there's a stillness that's settled over our lives. A sort of quiet that's usually hard to come by. All of a sudden, we have time to reflect and appreciate whatever little we have left.
So far, I cannot complain. These things are just material things. So the most important that we are healthy and alive. So that is. Yeah.
I personally, I'm not so happy, but I'm alive. So
all my money gone, but I have life. Everything is material things staying on this world. I have life, and I believe in God.
This experience has made me deeply thankful for the material things I have left, and for the modern. But it's our so-called backwardness that's been our saving grace. There's not many places in the world where people can find fresh food and water on their own. Nor are there many places where people could take a disaster like this so stoically.
Well, I understand where there's got a bomb, there's somebody a bomb, and we have to deal with it in life.
But of all the countries that can get through this, Dominica will.
By God's grace. Not by man's power, God's grace. Is if all of us put our heads together with faith and trust in God, life will carry on, but it is not easy.
The fact that we have the resources, water is life. Put up at the electricity, but water is life, and once you have food and water, you'll survive.
Life here is far from perfect, but it's taught us all some valuable lessons. Like how to live with the world instead of against it. Like accepting what is, because you can't control everything. As climate change intensifies worldwide, I have a feeling more and more people will be looking back to countries like ours. Or should I say forwards, for a blueprint on living well.
Thank you for our backstage team for sharing those clips for us and for sharing in the chat links to where you can find out more about that film. Please do follow these links that are being shared, and please do add your own questions to the chat, because we are going to have time to answer your questions, and our wonderful team behind the scenes is going to collate them for us. Yeah, that was incredible, Michael, and I hope everyone gets the opportunity at some point to see the whole film. Riddhi, we're going to come to you now, and you're going to share a poem for us. Do you want to give that poem an introduction as well?
So I'm reading a poem by the late Dr. G.N. Sai Baba. Dr. Sai Baba was a university professor in Delhi, and he was incarcerated like several other political prisoners. And he was wheelchair bound. He was accused of terrorist activity without any evidence being brought forward. And like many other political prisoners, like the Bhima Koregaon 16 in India, he languished in jail, and his health crises grew worse, but he didn't give up hope. And he kept writing his wife Vasanta poems. So I'm going to read a poem that he wrote. Dr. G.N. Sai Baba died recently. He was out on bail, and his condition had been so exacerbated he couldn't even enjoy a full year out of prison. So this is in his memory and in solidarity with other political prisoners who are still in jail in India today. Called I Refuse to Die. When I refused to die, my chains were loosened. I came out into the vast meadows, smiling at the leaves of grass. My smile caused intolerance in them. I was shackled again. Again, when I refused to die, tired of my life, my captors released. I walked out into the lush green valleys under the rising sun, smiling at the tossing blades of grass. Infuriated by my undying smile, they captured me again. I still stubbornly refuse to die. The sad thing is that they don't know how to make me die, because I love so much the sounds of growing grass.
Thank you, Riddhi. We're going to go from that poem into our next question, and I'm going to stay with you. And so the next question is about kind of standout examples of creative advocacy. So you've mentioned some of your own, and they are incredible standout examples. If you want to elaborate or talk about anyone else's, it's over to you. And how can people apply these things? So anything that feels like the template, you know, if we had in Michael's film, the blueprint for living well, do we have templates for creative advocacy that can be provided for those watching us right now? Riddhi. Sorry.
I did realize that. Yeah, I think one thing, like a couple of things that I would like to talk about that kind of also came through in Michael's film was community, which we've been talking about. The collective is like a really, really important thing. And also, I think thinking about history and building on legacy and adding to it. So, and when I think about creative advocacy, I also kind of think about what is a creative act, you know? So I think about Dr. Ambedkar, who is one of the icons of India and anti-caste activism, and he was the architect of a constitution. So Dr. Ambedkar was Dalit, and for those who don't know, in the caste hierarchy, Dalits are essentially were considered untouchables. And even though caste is supposed to have been abolished, in practice, it still continues in India today, right? And it trickles down in forms of class and labor and all of that, how life is experienced. So many years ago, Dr. Ambedkar led this thing called the Mahat Satyagraha, where they went to this, where he led basically a collective of people who were all Dalit like him, to go to this public water tank and to do the very radical act of putting their hand in and raising it to take a sip of water. And they were not supposed to do that because this communal tank was considered to be polluted by their touch. But they did that. And to me, that is such a creative act because it's creating this space of possibility that did not exist before. It's creating this future that we now exist in, that people, that other anti-caste thinkers and activists and writers and, many of my, comrades and friends and artists and poets have built on since then. So it's just created this really rich legacy. And I want to talk about this artist, Rajashri Gudi, who had this exhibition called Is the Water Chavdar, which was a homage to this undocumented 10,000 who journeyed for days through these really hostile towns and villages to reach that place, to reach Chavdar, which is where the tank was. And now it's become this really powerful site of pilgrimage that people go to, a spirit of like anti-caste resilience and activism. So to me, like Rajashri Gudi's work is building this kind of tangible, thing of resilience and of anti-caste living and creation and practice, because she's bringing about this anti-caste world that Dr. Ambedkar brought about and that we are still trying to usher in through our many actions today. So that's, for me, that's like a really fantastic example. So mainly, I really think if you're thinking of replicating, we really need to know our history. We need to learn from our legacies. We need to respect that. We need to learn from their mistakes as well, but really build on history and add to it and know that through incremental collective action and through solidarity with each other, through different movements, through persistence, through mulishness, that's how, you bring about change. And as a queer person in India, for instance, the country still doesn't recognize same-sex relationships. We still don't have equal marriage, for instance. It only recognizes biological families, which are often extremely violent to, trans persons or queer persons in general. So we still haven't got that. But through, say, the work that I do now, the work that I aim to create a queer mainstream in literature, and the work that other filmmakers have done and other choreographers have done, and just through working in the courts and changing the culture through all of these little incremental things, I hope in my lifetime we will see equality as well. So, yeah.
Thank you for those two really important points. And yeah, I was about to say let's move on, but I was like, oh, you're talking about queer stuff. I can't stop you. As a queer person, I should say. I didn't say that in my introduction. But Michael, let's go to you now. And if you can stick to one example and then any practical applications, suggestions for those watching, thank you so much.
One example, that's tough. Cool. Well, can I just mention my other one before going to my main one?
Quickly then, yes.
Quickly, is Roger Payne and his whale song. So recording these sounds of humpback whales, this vinyl that then went around was really instrumental in letting the public hear these sounds and become, captivated by the sounds of whales and really helped lead to the banning of whaling in about 16 years. The one that I wanted to touch on, though, that's more relevant to where I am is calypso music. So calypso music is a protest music that is often sort of done with what's the word? Metaphors, done very tongue-in-cheek. So there's like critique of the ruling class previously of colonial rule, but in a way that is what we call masking. So it's not completely obvious, but anyone that knows. And so it was a way when freedom of speech wasn't necessarily allowed that these issues could still be brought to the fore. And one specific example I thought really interesting is a Trinidadian calypsonian called Calypso Rose. She had a calypso called No Madame. And this was really about the poor treatment of domestic workers in Trinidad. And this song became popular, caught on, and then I think actually it was an Italian journalist that heard about it and wrote about it. And then this actually led directly to the enforcing of a minimum wage for domestic workers in Trinidad. And to me, it's really nice occasionally to get, these concrete examples where something actually tangible does happen. And I think though that it's clear. So in part, there's the aspect of you need to do something that raises the awareness, it captures people's imagination. There is that sort of luck element or working together element. There was a journalist involved in this particular example. But I think as Riddhi mentioned, oftentimes it's about collective action. It's about people in different spheres working together, working towards whatever, not just our individual goals, but truth, justice, all of these things there's going to be multiple goals that all interlink. And I think there's a lot of power when these different factions come together. And then I think in general, I guess to talk in the terms of today, virality, something that can be that the idea or the concept is powerful enough, catchy enough, and it's almost like a meme. It can be distilled very simply and shared very simply to sort of go around. And those, I think, are what kind of make up the formula to ideally getting something done through artivism.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Kumi, how about you? Artivism's a term you use, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I want to start with one bad example how not to do things. When I was executive director of Greenpeace International, I occupied an oil rig in Greenland, and the sign said, "Stop Arctic destruction." After I spent a week in prison and got out, a kid in my family said to me, "Uncle Kumi, what a stupid slogan. You activists just talk to yourself all the time." And I said, "People don't know what you were talking about, stop Arctic destruction." And then I said, "What would have been a better slogan?" And she said, "Save Santa Claus now." Right? So quite often, artists are connecting to where people's consciousness are rather than what some of us do, which is projection. Then when I was at Amnesty as Secretary General, I had an epiphany moment when I was invited by an artist called Olafur Eliasson, and he said, "I need you to come to Iceland." I said, "What's happening in Iceland, Olafur?" He says, "We're having a funeral." I said, "I'm sorry, who passed away?" He said, "An iceberg," right? And there was this very cheap to organize event compared to going and occupying an oil rig in the Arctic, for example. But the media coverage and impact it had, where there was a choir that sang at the top of this mountain, this dead iceberg and so on. And I had to think, why was it that it had such an impact? Because we were not talking jargon. We were not talking about degrees and parts per million and lots of acronyms that we talk about in the climate justice movement. We were talking about loss. Everybody understands loss. This iceberg that was there for decades, glacier, iceberg, it's gone. It's not coming back, and everybody understands loss. So that inspired me, and upon the passing of our son 3 years ago, we set up the Ricky Rick Foundation for the promotion of artivism. And in September last year, we organized the inaugural Global Artivism Conference that brought together artists from around the world and 89 countries. And I want to invite everybody to join that movement. The second convening will take place in Salvador Bahia, Brazil, just before the COP in November. You can Google it on globalartivism.org. And hopefully, it's very early days, but it's very, very clear. If I'm in the Pacific at the moment, right? And there's a band here called Pacific Climate Warriors, right? And they now frame themselves as, this is our home. And they have been communicating when they were the headliners at the inaugural Global Artivism Conference. and they touch people in a way that academics and activists were not able to do. And they've, I should say, have performed on the stage with Coldplay and other famous performers and so on. And their music is actually bringing in a new constituency to climate action on a scale that we didn't have before. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumi. So something we can all get involved in if we can get over there is this next Global Artivism Conference. Fantastic. And we've also heard, about A Funeral for an Iceberg. We've heard about the Calypso song, which is, I think songs are a viral thing as well. That's how they travel around, and the idea of virality. And then also we heard about the action at the water tank. So Selina, I'm going to bring you in. What's your example to add to this many wonderful examples we've heard already?
What a huge international, global, and I'll bring it right back down to our 7 and 8 year olds and the kids. And so I do a lot of work with my character Mophead, which was a race-based slur that was hurled at me when I was a kid and stayed with me for about 10 years. And then I turned it into my superpower. So this character, Mophead, has lots and lots of hair. And the latest book is a response to about 2,000 naughty questions, I called them, that were all directed to Dr. Mophead when I as poet laureate, decided to take the role out to the community and visited about 10,000 kids up and down Aotearoa, New Zealand over a period of 2 years. But kids would ask me big questions and there would be kind of no return address. And I was like, how do I address these questions? Many of which were in that space of no hope. Like, I'm a kid and the world's not going to be here when I grow up. I'm a kid and I won't be able to see an iceberg, or I won't be able to drink water from a river, or, and one question really got me, which was, dear Dr. Mophead, how do I still dream? And so I created a What Knot You Got book, and I identified the 11 most common knots that kids had and called them, labeled them, and then created these creative writing and drawing exercises to help kids loosen their own knots. And I ran a workshop at our massive Pacifica festival over the weekend, and 80% of the people who enrolled in that kids What Knot You Got workshop were adults with no kids. So it was like, this was my way of helping kids of all ages untangle knots, anxiety, worry, the worry about not being able to dream of a better place for themselves or their kids or their grandkids. And at the end of the workshop, when people shared their knots and their drawings, and they weren't artists, the one thing that surfaced was, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have hope in some way, shape, or form. And so that was the big insight. And I guess I just wanted to quickly add to Michael's amazing kind of picture of art as the Trojan horse. And I absolutely agree that is a necessity. That is very clever. And also that if I don't make heart art, if I don't believe in the art first and foremost, it doesn't seem to travel very far, So it's that magical space of creating art, not for art's sake, but art for spirit's sake, for heart's sake first. And then I think because you've honored that spirit, it touches people, moves their hearts, moves their minds. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. These are so many fantastic examples. And yeah, like you, Selina, I do a lot of workshops with children in schools, and getting young people to write about what matters to them is so important, whether it's about their identity, their fears and hopes, and I just find that is something that yeah, so many people don't get the opportunity to be asked even what it is that they care about, and who are you, how do you define yourself, what is your hopes for the future, for your life, for your country, for the world. And the more we can do that, the better. So thank you for your work, and thank you everyone for those fantastic examples. We're going to go into Q&A from our wonderful audience watching. And it's really great. The chat has been really buzzing, and people have not only been sharing like wonderful feedback for all of you, but also have been sharing links to their own artwork, which I'm really excited to look at after this. And yeah, and people want to invite you places. I've seen an invite for you, Selina, to go somewhere. It's going to be fabulous, I'm sure. So yeah, but a question that I'm going to read out, and we'll see when I've read it if one of you wants to take it. So here we go. In a world saturated with content, how can creative advocacy cut through the noise without becoming performative or sensationalized? I'll read it one more time. In a world saturated with content, how can creative advocacy cut through the noise without becoming performative or sensationalized? Maybe, Michael, can I go to you, because you were kind of talking about that, making something viral or a meme. How do we do that with integrity and authenticity? Like, what are your thoughts, or what have you seen that's done that?
It's a good question, and I think it's something that I'm trying to figure out now, because I would like probably a number of people here and a number of my friends really hate the idea and the term content. It just, even when you think about the Instagram feed, it's like just slop and it needs feed and it needs content. But at the same time, these are powerful mediums to reach a lot of people. And I think there are ways. I think even when you think about sort of traditional art or actions, even like what Riddhi mentioned with the hand going into the water tank, like, to me that is almost like a meme. Okay, so I think that there are ways to try and think about distilling these large issues into things that are simple and shareable. And I think, though, as long as you as the creator are still creating from a true place, that it's not going to turn into slop, essentially, unless you really are just saying, hey, I've got to make some content, and this is how I think content is made. I think, obviously there's a danger there, but I think if you're creating authentically and then just trying to understand how these platforms work, I think there is a way to split the difference.
Brilliant.
I've been
Riddhi, do you want to add? Oh no, go on.
Just quickly, I've been thinking about three kind of categories to help guide my life. And one is knowing what's my business, knowing what's your business, and then knowing what's God's business. And my business is to make art. God's business is to disseminate it and to share it if it's true. And your business is simply your business. So in terms of, how it lands, that's not my business. How I am with the art, that's all me.
Thank you, Selina. Yeah, Riddhi, did you want to add or respond to either of those two comments just now?
I think those are really smart, good points. And also, I was thinking really of what Kumi said also about the funeral for an iceberg. Like, I think it's just such a great example, like something simple, something true. Everybody understands loss, and it's just about what is going to communicate that. I don't know if everyone has had a chance to see, there was this documentary called All That Breathes that really created a lot of buzz like a while ago. It's called All That Breathes, and it was about these two brothers who were kind of taking care of kites who fell from the sky in Delhi, and they ran this like little bird clinic. And I just like that stuck with me so much because it was kind of about the air, but it was also about the non-human animals who live in our city and as kind of symbols of what is changing and all of that. So I just think the more specific you can get, which is in a way what Michael was also saying, like authenticity, like the more specific you can get, you tap into something real, I think you will avoid sloth, really. I think it's just, you got to be real, you got to get specific. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kumi, do you want to add anything? And can I add for you that it sounds like you really like listen to feedback when you do these kind of actions and you get feedback. You really take on board what people say and kind of think about how you can kind of improve next time or be more effective next time. And you seem to have a real intergenerational dialogue going on in your work as well. I just wanted to comment on that, but hand over to you now to answer the question about kind of how we can cut through the noise without being too performative or sensationalized. Or maybe we want to be sensational.
So thank you, Dean. I think, firstly, we must remind ourselves that arts and culture and the power of arts and culture has been used by authoritarian, fascist, anti-democratic folks. It's not that, and to be blunt about it, if you look at the US, the Trump movement has used and mobilized arts and culture much more thoughtfully than others have. So what I just want to flag, though, we also need to recognize that, Twitter is controlled by a guy who gives the Nazi salute, Elon Musk, right? Instagram and Facebook is Zuckerberg, who's aligned himself with Musk and Trump. So we also need to understand that to break through the noise of what's there, we sometimes have to do exceptional things. But the one thing I would say is that we have to understand that, anything we do has to be sensitive to the cultural context in which it's happening, right? So I don't know whether everybody knows what's mooning. Mooning is when like 10 people get together and on the bums, they write different letters and they go into a public space, they pull down their pants and it says, resist climate change or whatever, right? Now, mooning might work well in London and in, San Francisco and in New York. It won't work necessarily so well in Saudi Arabia or Indonesia and so on. So it's quite important that we don't try and put everything in one box, you know what I mean? That even the answer to this question, what is performative and what is not performative and so on, will be determined by the context in which that particular action is deployed. But I would just end by saying, what's fundamentally important is to not be jargonistic, right? And not to project our consciousness on the people that we are trying to bring in, right? And also, we also have to last thing I want to say, we have to recognize that there's a right for art's sake. We shouldn't also say to every cultural creative, oh, your work has to be, aligned to this issue and this cause and so on. Because like during the struggle against apartheid, some of our leaders would say to the artists, if they did a love song, for example, hey, we don't have time for love songs, man. You need to make songs about the revolution, right? And I think we have to build more respect, right, for the artistic community. And right now, if I ask the question, who is going to save the world? Is it going to be an activist like me, or is it going to be artists like many people on this call? I would, without hesitation, say that it's the artists and cultural creatives that are going to shift the needle. Because if I was so successful, right, in all those high titles I might have had, why is the world in such a crisis right now, right? So we have to also, at this moment, I would end by saying, listen to the words of the anti-colonial leader from West Africa, Amilcar Cabral, when he said, tell no lies and claim no easy victories. So right now, humanity is in a deep crisis. Activism in its formal, traditional sense has not got us to where we need to. And I believe fundamentally that art in all its different manifestations is going to play the key role if we have a chance to turn things around and reverse the climate crisis that threatens not the planet, but threatens our children and their children's futures.
Thank you, Kumi, and everyone for those answers. And thank you to Mandy who asked the question. I'm going to go to our next question from the chats, and so this is from Cynthia, and Cynthia has asked, how can we address the digital divide and ensure that advocacy efforts are accessible and inclusive for all? So those that are not able to get online, how can we involve them? Riddhi, you spoke about zines. Were they physical printed zines as well as online zines? Like, no. Okay, so
Not during COVID.
Not during COVID. But if it outside of COVID times, would you be doing physical form and spreading the word that way as well? Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on that, kind of crossing the digital divide? Yes, Selina.
Just the power of the zine. It's a piece of paper that can be folded a certain way, ripped in the middle, and voila, you have a book. And a few weekends ago, I ran a workshop with people wanting to write and tricked them into creating this 6-page image-centered story. And when everyone finished, we had an exhibition, and this was in a 2-hour workshop, and people cried to see that in this world of constant incompleteness, constant searching for finished things that are hope-centered, we created our own, zine festival exhibition, and we picked up these tender, simply drawn stories from the heart. It was exquisite. And what works for me in running a workshop like that is when participants discover and wonder at their own artistry and their ability to be a Tusitala, to tell their own tales. So a non-digital way, you just need to know how to fold a piece of paper and rip it in the middle, so you've got your own booklet.
Yeah. And I think, Michael, just to bring you in, I think murals and graffiti art as well is probably a way that's accessible and people can see it walking by. People can do it if you give them paints and permission, or maybe they don't need permission. But yeah, so these kind of like things out in public space and things that are fairly cheap to produce, like zines, done on photocopiers or written out by hand, are a couple of ways, I think. Let me move on to another question. And so we've got, how can art and culture amplify advocacy and drive meaningful impact in low-income communities? So maybe the advocacy that's already going on, how can the arts amplify that? That comes from the Oasis of Hope Association. Who would like to say something on that? Kumi, yes.
So if you look at the struggle against apartheid, most of our people were not able to read and write, right? And therefore, that was one of the consequences of apartheid's conscious attempt to deprive the majority of our people from access to education. So I would say without arts and culture, we would never have been able to mobilize people on the scale that we did. Right, so songs was used, dance was used. Some of you can Google it. Toy, Toyi, It was a form of dance that we did on the streets at funerals and so on. And like for example, when I made it to exile in my early 20s, I was speaking at a meeting and somebody put up their hand from Britain and said, "Why are your people so uncivilized? You'll sing and dance at funerals," right? And the idea behind that was to say to the oppressor, you can do what you want to do to us, but you'll never break our spirit, right? And it was also saying to the families, you have every right to celebrate your loved one because they lived with honor, dignity, and purpose. So it's very important to recognize that it is people within those communities who are low income and so on, who themselves are creators of arts and culture. They would not survive the pain of oppression and exclusion if they didn't have arts and culture, right? Arts and culture is actually what sustains people. So, and there's something in that question is about who is doing what to who, because it almost assumes, and I'd say this very gently, that there are some of us who are sitting with the knowledge of how to do it, and that we are experts and we know how to do it, and we have to go teach other people how to do it. I think what we have to do is have a posture that recognizes that creativity is coming from everywhere, right? And people who might, like us, who might see ourselves slightly ahead of the curve, we need to be listening and how we draw that creativity and cultural expression into what we are doing and bring it together with policy and advocacy in the formal sense.
Thank you. Before I go to the next question, Michael, did you want to add anything? I was thinking about, photography and filmmaking, kind of documenting what's going on in various communities.
I think Kumi's answer was fantastic.
All right. Well, the next question is about collaboration. So in today's world where digital media amplifies creative expression, how can artists and advocates across the Commonwealth collaborate to ensure that cultural activism leads to tangible policy and systemic change, rather than just raising awareness? So there's many parts of that question, but collaboration and, yes, raising awareness, but also leading to tangible policy and systemic change. Anyone already doing some of this that they want to talk about, collaborating across the Commonwealth?
I've been, I just fell in accidentally working with the Commonwealth and sending them poems that, like I've just finished a poem that I've yet to send, but it's based on the Commonwealth Charter. And my aim is to make it accessible. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been thinking, what is the metaphor, the best metaphor for the Commonwealth Foundation, based on the Commonwealth, where 57 plus member countries have been brought together due to their shared history of colonial oppression. So very violent roots, but we have become the world's only organization to bring together, communities. So the metaphor I came up with was the banyan tree. The banyan tree, an organism that chokes its host and then grows all these amazing, marvelous ecosystems within the one organization. And so that poem's coming, but that for me, to avoid burnout, which I think I may have already gone through 7.5 times, for me, I focus on one connection that has multiple connections, so I can focus on doing what I'm meant to be doing here on earth, which is the art and working within my zone of contact. So for me, the Commonwealth has been quite important there.
Wonderful, thank you. Anyone else involved in any collaboration or know of any collaborations that they want to shout out? Kumi?
So the one collaboration that we are talking about at the moment, and I hope it will happen, is to the emerging global activism movement, which will convene in Salvador, I said, in November. He's talking to the Commonwealth Foundation about developing almost a manual or a toolkit to cover some of the issues that we covered here, but also to be a guidance and with some resources and so on. And what we must realize that the biggest challenge that artists face is resources, right? It's and there's a high level of exploitation of artists that happens at multiple levels, including, by the way, with how AI is having a negative impact on people's cultural sort of productions being monetized by not the people that should be getting the resources for. And we know even musicians who make it, right, they have real difficulties with most of their resources going to the big music companies and so on. So I think we need to get resources out, and I hope that this collaboration of providing some resource guide about how do you navigate some of these tensions are. I mean, listen, I'm not saying any of this is easy, but at least we need to start coming up with solutions that give more power to the arts and culture sector. Thank you.
Yes, Riddhi.
Struggling with my unmute button. I just wanted to shout out very quickly Writers Against the War on Gaza, which is like a great example that I thought of now, which is really across countries, and they've occupied, like, I think the New York Times building before and called out their complicity in, whitewashing the massacres that have been happening. So they're not people directly in the region, and it's not just Palestinian people, but it's also other people of conscience and, writers and journalists and people who've gone and occupied bridges and stuff like that, and encampments and all of the various schools, which we can see are like, now it's a really bad time. We can see consequences that are coming through. For instance, we can see that a green card holder has just been disappeared. So not to go into all that, but I just wanted to shout out Writers Against the War in Gaza, I think, as an example.
Thank you. Okay, let's have our last question, and maybe if one or two people want to respond to this. So I'll read the question and then maybe interpret it. When art starts to become a voice, political eyes start to pry. What best advice would you give on how to stay true to advocacy and not allow oneself to be swayed? So, yeah, if you are feeling pressure from speaking out, how do you kind of not succumb to that pressure to be silent? Anyone have any advice or experience of that?
You mind just repeating the question?
Yeah, it says, when art starts to become a voice, political eyes start to pry. What best advice would you give on how to stay true to advocacy and not allow oneself to be swayed?
I guess I'll just say a little. So for instance, I think in Dominica and throughout the Caribbean, the political situations are always kind of funny because the communities are so small and everyone knows each other, that oftentimes critiquing whoever is the ruling party often can get you branded as anti that party. And I have seen it in groups that originally started off as, let's say, an environmental group, and then just became almost just an very much almost an anti one party group. And I think that's really dangerous because it alienates a lot of people that would join your movement but don't want to kind of get into those sorts of politics. And I think it's just, at least if in my interpretation of this question, it is just continuing to stay true to yourself, your mission, and your values, and knowing that whether, at least let's say in America, whether it's Republicans or Democrats in power, it shouldn't matter if, for instance, they're both committing a genocide and you're standing up against genocide, then that is your message and you stick to that and you sort of try and leave the more maybe personal politics at the door. That's my best answer for that for now.
Thank you, Michael. Selina, I see are you primed to talk and answer on that question as well?
I just have a good friend who is a poet who has taken on the conservative arm of our current government, This is a government that has taken away free lunches for lower socioeconomic groups to school, like just a whole host of things. But she really has become this voice against this particular party. And I've seen how she needs to severely shrink the group of people around her so that that she gets the support that she needs, because I've seen her go up and down when she taps in too much to what everyone else is saying and the criticism, and to the point where she won a national award and she was threatened that award, they were going to take the money away and they were going to audit all her accounts, and it was really crazy, high stress time for her. But I saw what she did is she just gathered the few around her and had to stop at a certain point, because the work was doing it, but she didn't have to be there every single time to defend it. Her poetry was doing it. So to protect the source of the inspiration, again, it's what's my business, what's your business, what's God's business. It's been really helpful for me, and I shared that with her.
Thank you, Selina. Well, we're going to stay with you, Selina, because you've got a poem to share with us. So thank you for everyone who's been asking questions in the chat. And yeah, I want you to listen to Selina's poem, and then afterwards, I want you to start writing in the chat what you will take away from this, what practical thing, what inspiration you've received that you have taken from today's session. And I'll try and read a few of those out from the chat after Selina's poem. So don't start writing now. Listen to Selina's poem. And then once she's finished, I'm going to remind you to write in the chat. But you can be thinking about what you've been getting from today. Selina, over to you.
Thanks, Dean. It's called 5 Fingers, 1 Hand. And just briefly, I refer to artists across the Commonwealth, and there's an artist statement that accompanies this poem that will be up somewhere, so you can figure out or you can find out about the things I'm referring to. 5 fingers spread across our global chart. 5 regions joined, no longer set apart. Africa, Asia, Caribbean, Europe, Pacifica blue. 5 regions, 1 hand, with much work to do. We are the voices rising from the din, speaking truths where silence has too long been. 5 fingers, 1 hand, refusing to bow, crafting visions of justice here, now. In Nairobi, murals bloom on concrete walls, while melting Kilimanjaro urgently calls. Lagos theatre turns cold numbers to life, humanizing data, raw and rife. 5 fingers, 1 hand, molding clay, sculpting futures for a new day. Chennai fishers cast nets of verse and voice, catching powers tied by conscious choice. Monsoon winds carry songs to halls of might, where suited men squirm at the sight. 5 fingers, 1 hand, seeds taking root, growing movements that will not be mute. Kingston dancers step with practiced grace, revolution and healing interlace. First Nations youth with rhythms clear, rap of medicine scent that disappear. 5 fingers, 1 hand, bridging space, connecting struggles no matter the place. London galleries hang migrant tales with care on walls where empire once declared its flair. Samoan tattoos speak of ancient lore, navigating crises as they did before. 5 fingers, 1 hand holding fast, weaving futures from the mattered past. We advocate with fire, not with fear, creating change all can see and hear. Our art cracks concrete that once stood firm. Seeds rise through brick, roots grow with earthworm. 5 fingers, 1 hand reaching high, painting red horizons in the sky. We speak to power through lens and song, through words and pictures that right historic wrong. Our melodies linger when protests fade, binding us in bonds that will not degrade. 5 fingers, 1 hand, create, debate, and play, a network of change that cannot be swayed. Together, we thrive when creativity speaks, when advocacy finds the strength it seeks, when stories become our collective might, when entertainment turns to lasting light. 5 fingers, 1 hand, working as one across the Commonwealth. Our work's just begun. The least heard now speak in voices true, in rhythms compelling, bold and new, in truths too powerful to be denied, in voices too strong to be defied. 5 fingers, 1 hand, reaching wide. Together, we thrive side by side. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Selina. What a powerful piece of writing. And oh, I'm lucky. I have it. I can read it again because I got sent it. So I'm going to really savor that poem and read it a couple more times this evening because there's so much to get from it. So thank you, Selina. Thank you, everyone who's been sharing their art, their practice, their artivism, and everyone. That includes everyone who's watching and sharing in the chat. I want to hear what you are taking away from today. What is your inspiration? What is your action? What is your kind of thought, your takeaway in your heart? What is it that you are taking from today? So please do add a thought into the chat for us. And I just want to begin wrapping up. I want to thank each of our participants. Do follow the work that they're doing. Do follow them personally.
Well, talofa bulavanaka maloelele, namaste. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for my fellow panelists, artivists, heart-centered, doing incredible work. And thank you everyone for viewing our panel. I think we're signing off now. Go make some art. Oh, Dean's back. There you go.
I lost my connection. Were you holding the fort, Selina? Tell me what we were saying.
I just thank everybody.
Thanks, everyone. But yeah, I just want to reiterate like how special this has been, how much practical advice we've heard, how many great projects we've heard of from the past, from the present, and from the future. Kumi, please remind us of your conference and how people could join, where they can find more information.
I've put the link in the chat already, so it's globalartivism.org. There's an online component as well as there'll be calls for people to express interest. It's from the 7th to the 9th of November, just before the climate negotiations in Brazil, in the city of Salvador. And please contact us via the website, and we look forward to engaging with many people, and you're welcome to get involved to build this global artivism movement. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Well, I've also been asked to share a piece of my writing, so I should do that before I lose connection again. So this is a poem that I wrote following a trip to Cyprus. I was at the Home for Cooperation, which is on the UN buffer zone. If people know Cyprus, they'll know it's divided in two and has been since a war in 1974. But there's a great place in the buffer zone, the UN buffer zone, called the Home for Cooperation, where all communities can come together. And there I led a queer poetry workshop with another queer poet called Kostia Solakis. And what I found really interesting is that we advertised this workshop as on queer poetry, and people were asking, I'm not queer, but I want to come. I am queer and I'm going to come. Or they didn't say, they just said they were going to come. And it was really lovely because the focus of the workshop was queer poetry, and but it didn't mean that the people attending had to be queer. So we kind of made it open, and it meant people at the workshop, some people made it clear that they were queers, some people made it clear that they weren't, but they were here to learn, and others didn't say. And I think that was a really interesting kind of way of having a space where the focus was kind of queerness, but the participants could be from, you know, from within or not the LGBT community. So this is called the Home for Cooperation. Just outside the window, barbed wire glints in the midday sun. A United Nations white canopy shades a United Nations white car. In this UN buffer zone, the English language unites 15 writers from Cyprus, Belarus, Greece, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and the United Kingdom. Laptops are tapped like typewriters once would have been when Britain wrote the constitution for this island. Pens scribble frantically with a 7-minute time limit. When the bell chimes at noon, there are still 2 new poems to be shared. No one says they need to leave, although many have driven far to be here, and 2 have flights to catch this afternoon. 2 lads from London and Athens will leave Cyprus queerer than when they arrived 5 days ago, decades ago, centuries ago. Outside the Home for Cooperation, 15 writers gather for a photo. They'll tag each other on social media, stay connected, reach out, return, or accept follows and requests for friendship. So that is my offering to today. I hope we stay connected. I hope everyone in the panel will stay in touch with each other, and you will stay in touch with them by following them and their work and joining their great artivism projects that they have ongoing. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the Commonwealth Foundation and everyone behind the scenes that made this happen. And yeah, I hope to see people online or in person at some point in the future. I feel really hopeful leaving this session that there's great work being done and a community across the Commonwealth that we can tap into and continue to do great things through art and advocacy. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you, Dean, for your fantastic moderation.
My pleasure, Kumi. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bless you. Thank you.